What's up, everyone? Thanks for joining us for another edition of the Frary Smith Podcast. It's Tuesday, February 20th, and today it's episode 183 of the show. And as we promised you for the last couple of weeks, we've been planning on a mailbag, but things just keep popping up. The latest thing that popped up was a change in head coaches at Georgia State, and so we decided to extend our trending topic series to discuss the offseason coaching carousel in the conference. But Kane, before we get into that episode, I heard you had a great weekend in Nashville as you get set to make a big move.
Yeah, definitely a great weekend moving to Nashville next month around that time period. So looked at some apartments with a roommate last weekend and had a great time for sure. I'm definitely excited to be in that city and continue doing this and other podcasting stuff. That's the beauty of this industry now and with podcasting is you can do it wherever. So definitely excited to be in a new city, but continue to do this podcast and other stuff as well in the sports media world.
Yeah, definitely excited. I know I had a good week down in New Orleans, got to call the first televised Sunbelt Women's Swimming and Diving Championship. And it's a little surprise. James Madison won another conference title. They seem to be racking them up here in the Sunbelt. But before we get to today's show, I want to tell our listeners about our show from last Thursday. We're in the midst of a trending topic series discussing some key topics affecting the Sun Belt. And at that point, we plan to wrap up with a discussion about the calendar. Obviously, things have gotten extended, but we talked about early signing day, the transfer portal. We even discussed the possibility of a future rivalry week in the conference. We looked at, would it be feasible to have a neutral site championship? So a lot packed into that episode. We definitely suggest going back and giving it a listen. But today, Caden, as I've mentioned, obviously there is a lot going on in terms of coaching turnover in the conference. We saw Shawn Elliot leave Georgia State. We've now seen Brian Ellis leave as the offensive coordinator at Georgia Southern to go to Alabama, where he's going to be the new tight end coach there. So a lot of turnover in the conference, and we want to take a moment just to discuss all the changes that we've seen. We're going to bring 24/7 Sports' Ben Moore on the show in just a few moments to discuss the change specifically at Georgia State. So excited to get into that conversation in a moment. But Cato, we have seen a ton of movement in the conference this year, particularly at the head coaching position. 40% of the league's coaches, 5 out of the 14, will not be here heading into 2024. What do you make of all the turnover that we're currently seeing in the head coaching position at the Sun Belt level?
Yeah, it's just a reflection of the times. I think this whole series has kind of documented a lot of the changes of college football, and one of the residual effects of those changes has been clear at the head coaching position across college football and specifically impacting the Sun Belt Conference. I mean, when you look above the Sun Belt this offseason, you've seen retirements, you've seen coaches go to the NFL, you've seen head coaches come to become coordinators. It's madness at the top level, and that's trickled down to the Sun Belt. And I think it's just a direct reflection of what we've seen lately, even in the last couple hours, as far as this conference, the coaches continuing to move and be mobile and trying to figure out what their future looks like, whether it's in this conference or out of the conference. So just a reflection, I think, of these times in college football. This is definitely a memorable off season as far as everything that's going on off the field. And I think once all the dust is settled, hopefully there'll be a little bit less of movement going forward in this conference and beyond in college football in this new era that we now see.
Yeah, we spent Thursday talking about how the calendar never seems to end. And I think this offseason is a perfect culmination of that discussion. Still hiring coaches here in the mid to late part of February, I think is wild. But we promised you a conversation with 24/7's Ben Moore. Well, we are excited to be joined now by Ben Moore. Ben, you feel a little bit like the Lincoln lawyer right now, working out of your car in the midst of it's what's been a busy couple of days in terms of news about the Georgia State football program.
Yeah, there's no question. Certainly unexpected news nationally and regionally. But folks close to the program weren't necessarily shocked overall with Shawn Elliot leaving to return back to his home state and a place that he and his wife and kids have called home, going back to Columbia, South Carolina. Certainly the timing of it may be a little surprising for sure. But yeah, Georgia State football is looking for a new head coach for the first time since December 2016. So a lot to talk about. I know we're going to get into it, but yeah, a lot of Sun Belt turnover, and Georgia State's just the latest.
Well, let's talk about it because Coach Elliott obviously was the longest tenured Sun Belt head coach at this point after 7 seasons. You mentioned that it wasn't much of a surprise and it kind of started to feel a little bit expected at some point. Just talk us through why you believe this decision was made and particularly the timing behind it.
Certainly. What wasn't so much a secret, and then kind of continued to get a little bit louder really in the last 2 or 3 years. Head coach Shawn Elliott's wife and kids did not live in Atlanta. They did not make the trip from Columbia, South Carolina after he left the University of South Carolina to take the head coaching job. They certainly were staples at Center Park Stadium, downtown Atlanta, came down for practices and times that way. But as a family man myself who has a high schooler, I couldn't imagine, being away from my wife and kids and obviously the stress and life that we know is college football and being a head football coach. But I know that was taking a toll on him. He kind of broke down a little bit at a press conference in 2022, talking about missing his daughter's state championship cheerleading routine basically there, and not being able to celebrate with his daughter live and in person because he was working there and had a game there. And going back to the fall, his son had his first varsity appearance at AC Flora High School, and Shawn Elliot basically skipped out on an open practice for students and fans, and that kind of raised some eyebrows. And then a few weeks later, the Columbia Star comes out and says, "Hey, Shawn Elliot has been in every single football game for his son," and that was even more kind of curious because ultimately, he's traveling or not traveling with the team when they go on the road. He's not, working with the team that way. So when exactly is he working on it? All's good when life's good when you're winning, right? So the team sprinted out to a 6-1, start. And then the collapse happened, right? 5 straight losses, and certainly just absolutely awful loss there at Old Dominion. Double-digit lead just completely blown apart, and the way that team lost. But then they woke up. 3.5, 4 weeks later, went out to Boise, Idaho, and just thumped the crap out of Utah State and old friend Blake Anderson. So I think it was an interesting offseason, and just the tenor around the program. I know for a fact that the transfer portal and losing some of his best players and some of his impact players weighed on him. Talked to some folks close to him and members and even former members of his staff. I mean, you lose 11 players to Power 5 teams the last 2 off seasons. That wears on you. I've heard terms amongst Group of 5 coaches where they feel helpless from tampering that we just know happens for good players. You recruit, develop these players, and then ultimately you get them to a point where they're kind of hitting their prime and pop, they're gone. They're gone, whether it's NIL promises or actual NIL money. Marcus Carroll, one of the leading rushers in the Sun Belt and in the nation, he skips out in the bowl game and he commits to Missouri on his first weekend. You have Robert Lewis jumps in the portal and pops to Auburn. Montavious Cunningham, the right tackle, goes to Virginia Tech. So ultimately, Georgia State was not able to retain that talent. But I thought at least this offseason he had gone into the portal and done something he really hasn't done and stepped out of his comfort zone. Grabbed some guys that were from the metro Atlanta area that maybe he missed in on the first time around at a high school, now went back into the portal and they wanted to finish up their career and come home. Gone to places like Kentucky and Louisville, where he had seen success in 2023 as well, grabbing Henry Bryant on the defensive line. So there's the portal swings both ways for sure, and it looked like Shawn Elliott at least had kind of his staff had done a great job acquiring some talent, but ultimately it sounded like the dam broke a little bit with him and his family, and he even mentioned it in the press release, saying that ultimately he knew this potentially was going to be a step back for him professionally, but personally this was the right decision for him at this time.
Definitely appreciate that perspective, Ben. It's just nice hearing about that kind of behind the scenes workings and how some of the writing might have been on the wall for him making an exit, and also knowing kind of the space that college coaches and the position that college coaches are in with some of the struggles at the Group of 5 level, and especially at the Sun Belt with the transfer portal and some of the other changes that we've seen across college football. But you mentioned it, this is a guy who's been around for nearly half of this program's tenure as a football program. He's led y'all to 4 bowl wins. He's beaten Tennessee in an upset win and has really done a great part in changing and shifting the culture of this program. Could you maybe talk about that and how he'll be remembered positively in Atlanta for what he's done in the last 7 years?
Yeah, no question. I think you start positive, okay, and that's a great way to put it. He ultimately 41 wins in 7 years. There's some programs that say, hey, maybe that may not be good enough. Just to kind of give you guys some perspective, when he took the program over, Bill Curry coached for 3 seasons and won a total of 10 games. Trent Miles coached for the better part of 4 years and won 10 total games. So when he came in, he established really a toughness, talked about from the very beginning that this program was going to run the football and be a tough, beat you up kind of team, and really establish an identity. Shawn Elliott did that. He was a fiery competitor. Certainly, most famously, you see him going up and down and kind of shoving his players players and pushing in kind of a playful manner pregame, getting guys fired up. And ultimately, I think the things that he has built from the lack of a foundation, if you will, back in 13, 14, 15, 16, there is a firm foundation right now for the next coach to build upon. And that's a huge credit to Shawn Elliot and his staff. His coaching tree certainly is all around the Power Five right now. He lost 5 assistant coaches in one fell cycle to Power Five teams 3 years ago. Lost his OC to Louisville, and now he's at Cincinnati this year. Lost another defensive back to Georgia Tech. So obviously, there was some success there. I think he averaged right about 5.8 or almost six wins a season in his tenure there with those 41 wins. So ultimately, he proved a few things for the future coaches and folks that are interested in this position is you can win here. There is a facility here. There is administration to support building and growing, a football program that still is in its relative infancy and has only been FBS since 2013. So you're talking about basically year 15 in total for the program, led it to successes that it had never had before, and now really it's just having the next coach, whoever that may be, grab the baton and really pick it up and run with it.
Well, Ben, and I think to your point, and as the songwriter once wrote, the past is in the past at this point, and you started to go down that path talking about what makes this job at Georgia State attractive. What are some of those things that might attract, perhaps a top assistant at the Power Five level to want to come to Georgia State and build this program into the future?
Yeah, I think there's a couple different buckets you can look at it here. Ultimately, can you win? As I mentioned before, are there facilities that are Division I or FBS quality? And you check that box as well. You have administrative support. The president, athletic director, very supportive. Ultimately, with the football program and growing the football program, in a variety of different ways. And the other side is, can you recruit? You recruit the area. The metro Atlanta area in the state of Georgia produces a tremendous and a wealth amount of talent. You just look up every college football roster and even NFL roster. You have Georgia ties and kids that are from there. Ultimately, too, even with the transfer portal, as it swings out, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, it can come back as well, too, where you miss guys that maybe you're in on out of high school to go to a bigger program, don't play. You have the ability to bring them back. Certainly on the basketball side, you saw Ron Hunter do that for 4, 5, 6 years and have wild success in basketball. You can absolutely do that in football as well. The biggest thing ultimately, Shawn struggled and his staff struggled to grab Metro Atlanta talent, to be candid. Georgia kids a lot of times looked and maybe weren't engaged enough in their view, talking to high school coaches every Friday night, as I did, that Georgia State, hey, they would go and run to South Carolina and grab kids because that's where Shawn was from, or some of his assistant coaches had relationships there, or going to the state of Alabama, or going down to Florida, which, again, isn't bad, but ultimately you're a downtown Atlanta program. You have to go and make your hay, especially over half your roster when it's not from the state of Georgia. There's a lot of folks that perception becomes reality. So I think that's the humongous opportunity here, where ultimately there's a lot of things in place that were not in place when Shawn got here, that he's kind of established and created or corrected. I think it's a humongous opportunity for, whether, as you mentioned, a Power 5 assistant, Power 5 coordinators that have been interested in this job, or hey, a successful FCS head coach may look at it and say, I've worked with duct tape and razor wire over here. Basically, I can build in the Sun Belt, where Sun Belt programs are getting $2 million a year with their football contracts. So ultimately, there's an opportunity to build, and I think, again, Shawn left it better than what it is, and I think there is a multitude from conversations that I've had. Candidates are very interested in this position, and whether they're from the state of Georgia or have ties to the state of Georgia, they want to come here and they want to jump in because they also see an opportunity, right? You succeed at the Sun Belt level, 2-3 years, you can launch yourself, as we've seen, to Power 5 opportunities and truly life-changing money.
As a former Georgia football player at the high school level, I agree with a lot of what you said there, Ben. But I think overall, it's going to be fascinating to see who takes over the helm of this program because of, like you mentioned, there's a strong recruiting base there. I think Atlanta, in the future of NIL, is going to have a lot of opportunities for student athletes as well. And then, of course, there's a head coach that's going to come in that's going to have to make the program a little bit more attractive as far as fan engagement and support. So I think it's going to be interesting to see who can maybe take this program to the next step after what Shawn Elliot was able to do. But we talk about head coaching candidates. We know some people have interviewed for this job already. What maybe profile or traits are you looking for as far as the next head coach of Georgia State, whether that's experience, the background, like you mentioned, maybe an FCS coach or coordinator? What do you think would be the best and ideal fit for this program moving forward?
Yeah. I think just ultimately somebody that's going to be relentless recruiting. Georgia State has a unique profile being downtown Atlanta, but also has obstacles that you have to overcome as well, right? It's a super crowded landscape between you have again two-time national champion up there in Georgia grabbing some attention. I can't tell you how many Georgia folks, Georgia State alums who have season tickets to Georgia Tech or Georgia State or maybe Falcon season ticket holders, so they're going to wait out and hold their money for for Sundays instead of Saturdays, or even Atlanta United. Soccer is big in Atlanta as well. I've talked to folks who have skipped who have been Georgia State season ticket holders and said, you know what, I'm going to go to an Atlanta United match because hey, we're playing ULM or Southern Miss or somebody that way. It's really trying to win at such a high level, so you have to find somebody that has a successful plan and or has come from a successful pedigree, right? Someone that knows how to say, hey, I can build, what that program over there did. I look at a guy like Brian McClendon. His name's out there publicly several times. Guy that interviewed for the job was a finalist. That Shawn Elliot got the job in 2016. From that point, he went to South Carolina. Was the OC there under Muschamp. Went to Oregon for Mario Cristobal. Went to Miami again with Mario Cristobal, and then has been at Georgia the last 2.5 years. Ultimately, guys like that, Del McGee, guy that has been at Georgia, has coached in the Sun Belt with Georgia Southern, was a super successful high school coach as well, that is not afraid to kind of dig in and really find the guys that are that next level down. You're not going to go get the 4-star and 5-star guys in the Sun Belt. It's just, we would cover recruiting long enough. It's just not going to happen. Ultimately, you got to find that next tier and find those guys and stay on their radar so they're not going to an AAC school or a Conference USA school or a MAC school, or being able to develop those guys who maybe only have high-end FCS offers, for example, and going and developing those guys and say, look, stay home, play in front of family and friends. Ultimately, don't go elsewhere. And how many times can your parents see you play? And there's going to be plenty of opportunity with the new coach that comes in. The roster is pretty balanced. Another credit to kind of Shawn Elliot as well. So you're not top heavy in one underclassmen, upperclassmen. And again, you still have a transfer portal in April. So you have a window here where we kind of evaluate the staff and go. But it's got to be a relentless recruiter, somebody who's super comfortable recruiting to the city of Atlanta. I think that's a big part of it. And quite candidly, as we talked about in that line before, Shawn Elliott kind of being a part-time resident of Atlanta, I believe hurt recruiting ultimately. And you got to have somebody that's familiar with the city of Atlanta and is happy to live here.
Well, Ben, you've been at the forefront of this news for the last couple of days. Appreciate you taking some time to come on, and make sure you get some coffee and stay awake, as we can't wait to see you break this news in the days ahead.
Yeah, thanks for having me, fellas. Appreciate you.
Well, definitely appreciative for the time that Ben Moore gave us this morning, Caden. A lot of great insight on this Georgia State program. And, obviously fans that follow externally other programs, tend to like to knock on Georgia State. But I do think there are a lot of unique traits that, if exploited well, could lead to this Georgia State, program being successful in the Sun Belt. And you don't have to look much farther than a recruiting base that you like to talk about in the state of Georgia. There's a lot of good football players there. And if Georgia State can find a way to begin tapping into that, this is a program that could be successful with the right head coach in the state of Atlanta or city of Atlanta, state of Georgia.
Yeah, no, you talked about in the past when we talked about the season that Texas State just had, we kind of called them a sleeping giant in the west of this conference. I think it'd be safe to say that Georgia State could be the sleeping giant in the east of this conference when you think about the ever changing college football landscape, the strengths and weaknesses that it sounded like Coach Elliott had, elevating this program with some of the strengths that he had as far as the performance of his team and what he was able to put on the field, but maybe getting a next head coach who can lean into some of the strengths that is untapped potential as far as this program goes, whether it is NIL, whether it is recruiting within the state of Georgia and beyond. And I think this program is in a great spot, I think, as a whole, moving forward in the future to kind of evolve and adapt with the right leader at the helm in this new age of college football. But it's also going to be a competitive field. It's not going to get any easier in the Sun Belt anytime soon. So they're definitely going to have their work cut out for them as well, just because we know how the football culture has been as far as an outside perspective, coming to Georgia State games, being in that stadium and seeing what that environment is like. So definitely exciting in this future for Georgia State for sure, as they get a new head coach and a new leader at the helm.
Kane, I think it's interesting, as we got into this trending topic series, the coaching carousel and the changes at the head coaching position was a topic that we bandied about. We decided we weren't going to do it. And then we end our series on Thursday, and then this news breaks, and we decide, you know what, we've got to talk about it. And I think the reason that we decided that it was important to talk about the coaching carousel is that, we are seeing, the state of the head coaching position kind of change in front of our eyes. And just this offseason, we've seen, obviously, 5 head coaches that have moved on, 4 for different jobs. One, Terry Bowden at ULM, that was fired. He's been replaced now by Bryant Vincent. But I think Coach Elliott was shocking to a lot of people, seeing him step back from a head coaching role into now what will be a tight end coaching role at South Carolina. And it further just speaks to some of the changes that we're seeing in this position. The head coaching position is no longer as glamorous of a role as it was in the past, simply due to a lot of the things that we've discussed in this trending topic series, the calendar, the transfer portal, and many others. No longer is this an easy job, and it never was, but is this necessarily the job that everyone wants to have?
Yeah, it's fascinating. I think when you talk about all of these changes across college football that we've talked about, whether it's the calendar, recruiting, the transfer portal, NIL, all of that kind of stuff, we never really thought of coaching being a residual effect from it, but it's definitely being impacted heavily. And I think that starts at the very top of this profession. When you see guys like Nick Saban retire, Jim Harbaugh go to the NFL level, we're not going to know how much this new changing landscape and their kind of job title and kind of what you have to do as a head coach now has an impact on that, but you have to imagine it at least has some impact. And I think when you see a coach like Chip Kelly at UCLA take a step down and want to be in his own conference at Ohio State calling plays, that kind of leaves the door open for Group of Five and Power Five movement going anywhere you want, between coaches maybe taking a step down to go at a bigger school, or coaches going to the NFL level because they don't really want to deal with this nuance of the game. You talk about a coach, like I've mentioned before, in Orion Day and Elijah Drinkwitz at Missouri, who is kind of taken a step back from his play calling duties for the first time in his career, both head coaches, and now they're having to do more of this CEO role, to where recruiting and the NIL and the portal stuff has just become so more relevant and so more impactful for coaches. And a lot of coaches didn't necessarily get into this profession to do that. They want to call plays. That's the best part of this job, is being able to mold and shape young men and put them on the field and have them produce the best they can when Saturdays come for kickoff. So I think we're seeing it now at the Sun Belt level. We've seen coaches make all different kinds of moves in every different direction. I'm happy to talk about them with you. And I think they're not all created equally, for sure, but I think it's all a reflection of these changing times in college football, and maybe coaches at every level, especially the Sun Belt as well, realizing, hey, it's not a secret that at the Group of Five level, every coach wants to get to that Power Five level. There's certain jobs that are going to have a level of appeal and cachet that are going to attract the attention of any coach in the country. But that path to getting there now seems more different than ever. And it's interesting watching these different head coaches make different moves accordingly with these new changes in this new era of college football.
Well, and Kane, I think that's a great segue into this next topic of conversation relating to the coaching carousel, and that is the fact that not every head coaching defection is the same. I mean, last year, you think back to Jamie Chadwell leaving for Liberty, and there was a lot of consternation in the Group of Five about what some had viewed as a lateral move. But when you simply look at the salary figures, a $3 million raise, that is not the same move as some of these other job changes. You think of John Summerall leaving for Tulane, much the same. There's private money at that institution. But then, you look at a Kane Womack, which I think was a little bit surprising, him leaving a head coaching job to then go become the defensive coordinator at Alabama. But let's be honest, most people are going to make that leap if given the opportunity. You look at Cignetti going to Indiana. I think that is kind of one of those more normal changes where you see a Group of Five head coach becoming a Power Five head coach at maybe a slightly lesser program. And then obviously this most recent one with Shawn Elliot. And I think that was the one that shocked people. But the one thing we can say is not every head coaching change or decision is created equal in this new landscape.
Yeah, like I mentioned before, I think every coach is aspiring to be at the highest level of college football possible. You think about the Alabamas, the high-end SEC programs, the Texases, the Oregons, all those places that pretty much all of the head coaches that denied or didn't show interest in that Alabama job, those kind of jobs, that's what everyone aspires to get towards in this field, the cream of the crop. And I think in the past couple of years, the way to get to that was being a Group of Five head coach or being a Sun Belt head coach, winning your conference, having tremendous success, and then getting that interview and getting that opportunity to make it to that next step. But I think now we're seeing with this changing college football landscape, there's different ways to get there. And I think if you're a head coach who maybe doesn't want to deal with having one of those great conference rosters and winning a conference championship and having other teams through the portal trying to take some of your players, having to deal with lesser of an athletic budget and less of a salary, you're seeing some of the moves we're seeing now where they might seem like lateral moves when you talk about a Coach Chadwell or a Coach Summerall. But when you think about the budget and you think about the progression of becoming a head coach at that top level, it's all the same. And then The other side of that is when you're talking about a coach like Kane Womack and a coach like Shawn Elliott moving on to the SEC conference, not necessarily being a head coach, but taking a position coach, taking a coordinator job there, getting your foot in the door at the Power 5 level, and having a job where you're not a head coach and you don't have to deal with this stuff as much when you talk about NIL, the portal, all of that kind of stuff that's now changed in college football. So I think right now, when you look at the jobs in college football, they all have a lot of different descriptions. They all have a lot of different budgets, and they have a lot of different situations to get to that top level. And it's clear now with seeing how these different coaches have moved within the Sun Belt and out of the Sun Belt that there's different ways to get to where you want to go. There's different jobs that are attractive for different reasons. And that's a lot to do with a lot of the topics I think we've talked about in this series.
Yeah, it is definitely, a fascinating time in college football. I think the norms are changing, and they're changing very quickly. So it's certainly worth paying attention to. Kane, I think, one of the biggest things that, for fans of the Sun Belt, even the group of five as a whole, is this the new normal? And I think when you look at, head coaching defections, obviously we mentioned 5 of the 14 teams in the Sun Belt will have new head coaches this year. That's 40% of the league almost. Do you expect this to become the norm? Are we going to see that amount of turnover, not only at the Sun Belt level, but at the group of 5 level yearly?
No, I don't expect to see it yearly. Like we talked about at the top, I think this is going to be a watershed moment going into a new era of college football that will be remembered in history. And I think we saw a lot of change as a result of that. You talk about a lot of the changes at the top of college football, and they all trickle down. I mean, when you talk about a guy like Nick Saban retiring, Kalen DeBoer taking that job, Jed Fish taking that job, someone has to take the Arizona job. There's just a lot of trickle down, and I think we're seeing that now at a lot of different levels of college football coming down to the Sun Belt as well, and affecting and impacting that level of ball as well. So I think as far as the era of college football we're in right now, this is going to be a moment where we see more coach turnover than ever as everyone tries to prep for these changes and figure out where their role is in this new college football landscape. Am I a head coach that wants to stay at the college level because of these changes or go to the NFL? Do I want to become a coordinator at a bigger school or stay at the group of 5 level? We're seeing coaches in real time have to make these decisions and make these impactful decisions moving forward. And I think in the future, we're going to continue seeing head coaches kind of know where their stance is in this new college football landscape. Am I a guy who saw myself as a play caller and thought being a head coach was what it was, and now I just want to be a coordinator who calls plays? Every coach is getting in where they fit in now. Sunbelt coaches are now invigorated now with new coaching talent that are going to be proving themselves. So it's going to be exciting to see the Sunbelt in this new era with all these head coaches that have joined the conference now. But I think moving forward, we're not going to see nearly as much turnover next season or the season after that, especially in the Sunbelt. I think overall in college football as a whole.
Yeah, okay. Now I would tend to agree with you. I think that again, this has been a watershed type of offseason. This is not a normal offseason. I don't think this will become the expectation moving forward, but it certainly has opened some eyes. And I think I want to put a cap on this conversation by simply talking about a point that Commissioner Gill brought up in that conversation that we had with him a couple weeks back, and that's leaving the program better than you found it. And I think Coach Elliott, who we started this conversation talking about, is an example of that. Ben talked about just the better culture in terms of on the field. He talked about increased wins. You think of a guy like Jamie Chadwell, like John Summerall, like Kurt Signetti. The list goes on and on. The coaching hires in the Sun Belt lately have left the programs better than they were found. It has elevated the type of candidate that is then able to be rehired the next time around. And I think that's what we want to see as fans continually, is that when these new head coaches take these roles, that then when they leave in a couple of years, which will continue to happen, that these programs have been left in a better spot than they were found.
Yeah, there's no question. No, I think when you look at the desires of head coaches, if you want to be a college head coach, if you're an FCS head coach, if you're a position coach at the Power 5 level or a coordinator at any level of college football, and you aspire to be a head coach, why would you not want to be at any of these Sun Belt programs that we've seen in the last couple of years really get elevated and really get put on a platform where if you're winning, you have success, you're winning at the premier, one of the best group of 5 conferences and conferences at large. When you look at competition throughout the league, you're going into programs that have proven that coaches can come in and have success and take programs to new heights. You talked about James Madison, you talk about Coastal Carolina, you talk about Troy, that Coach Summerall has now left behind. These are programs that all have the potential to win the conference, to be champions, and have put themselves in unique positions all individually, to where there's no question that if you want to prove your worth as a coach in the college football space, the Sun Belt's a great place to do it, just given the resources you will have, how you can potentially elevate those resources resources, elevate your own roster, and really prove on a national stage that you have the chops. So I think it's going to be fascinating to watch all these young, hungry head coaches, a lot of them we have in the league, really try to prove themselves this year. And they have definitely the resources and the tools to do it. And it just makes me even more excited about this college football season that's a ways away, but just excited to continue to dive into these programs and see what these head coaches' visions are and what they want to see with their schools in the next couple months and going into the season.
Yeah, Caden, I think to your point, I think 2024 in the Sun Belt, it feels more wide open than ever. There's a lot of potential changes to the calculus that will affect who ultimately comes out on top of the Sun Belt. Well, that's going to do it for today's episode. We hope y'all enjoyed this conversation. Don't forget, we're coming back on Thursday. Caden and I are planning a conversation that will dissect some of the Sun Belt participants in the upcoming NFL Combine. We'll talk about the Sun Belt players represented and what they need to do to better position themselves as we begin to look ahead to the NFL draft that's coming up in April. But that's going to do it for us here at the Frary and Smith Podcast. Before you go, here's one thing you can do for us. Tell a friend about this show. Help us help you by continuing to grow this show into the premier destination for Sun Belt football fans. So for Caden Smith, Richmond Weaver, and Brett Jemis, I'm Noah Frary. Thanks for spending more time with us today. We really appreciate it. And we'll talk to you again on Thursday.